10 years ago, Julian Mercer paid off Elena Carter's father's medical bills, and in return, she agreed to give him an heir, signing a contract promising that after giving birth to the child, she would disappear forever and never see her baby again. No visits, no holidays, no name on the birth certificate. He had his lawyers write it that clean, leaving her completely heartbroken and empty. But what men like Julian Mercer never think to put in a contract is a clause protecting themselves from what a woman rebuilds herself into once her grief runs out of places to hide. Tonight, he is going to walk into her boardroom, still believing she is the same broke 22-year-old girl he once paid to vanish. He has absolutely no idea she is the exact reason his entire empire is the one vanishing now. "10 years ago, Elena Carter was 22 years old and completely out of options. Her father had passed away after a long illness, leaving her drowning in medical bills and facing the loss of her family's small home. She needed money, fast and clean, without any loans she could never pay back. That was when Julian Mercer stepped into her life. Julian was 35, wealthy, and ran Mercer Industries, a massive development company he had inherited from his family. He wanted a son to carry on his name and secure his hold on the family estate, but he didn't want the complications of a marriage or a real relationship. He offered Elena a deal that sounded simple on paper: be a surrogate mother for his child, and he would pay off every single dollar of her father's debt. Elena signed the papers because she felt she had no other choice. For 9 months, she carried the baby, following every strict diet and medical rule Julian's lawyers set for her. But when the day came and the baby boy was born, the reality of the contract hit her like a physical blow. She lay in the hospital bed, drained past the point where her body even felt like hers. The nurse took the baby to the corner of the room to weigh him, and Elena looked toward the door and asked, her voice shaking so badly she barely recognized it, "Can I please hold him just once before he leaves?" Julian stood near the door in a sharp suit that cost more than the house she had nearly lost. He didn't look at the baby the way a father looks at a child. He looked at him the way a man checks that a shipment has arrived without damage, quick, assessing, already thinking about his next meeting. He didn't even answer her question. He simply slid an envelope across the small bedside table, looked at her coldly and said, "We had a deal, Elena. You were a paid womb, nothing more. Take the money, clear your debts, and never come near my son again." He walked out of the room with the baby in the nurse's arms behind him. Elena lay there and cried in a way she had never cried before. She didn't stop because the grief ran out. She stopped because she taught herself, brick by brick, never to let that pain out where anyone could see it again. She opened the envelope, counted the check that saved her family home, and made a quiet, heavy promise to herself. No one would ever again get to decide she was worth nothing more than a signature. Elena didn't become powerful quickly, and she didn't become powerful cleanly. She started at the very bottom, taking an entry-level analyst position at a mid-tier lending firm that hired people without connections because nobody with better options wanted to work those hours. She remembers one particular November night, 3 years into that climb. It was 11 o'clock, and she was sitting alone in her car in the office parking garage. The overhead light flickered above her, making the empty concrete structure feel freezing and abandoned. Her manager had dumped a distressed loan folder on her desk right at 5 p.m., a pile of dead debt that 4 senior analysts had already passed over as completely worthless. Elena sat in the driver's seat with the heat turned off to save gas, balancing her cheap laptop on the steering wheel. Her eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets for 14 hours straight, but she refused to go home. She kept digging, scrolling through 4 layers of buried collateral paperwork until she noticed something weird. An entire division of industrial properties had been mispriced by the original bank for 2 straight fiscal quarters. The actual assets sitting underneath the bad loans were worth 3 times what the firm had paid for them. She sat in the dark and read the numbers 3 times before she let herself believe them. She knew that bringing this up to the partners was a massive gamble. If she was wrong about the valuation, she would be fired by lunch. But she took the shot anyway. She walked into her director's office the next morning and dropped the printed analysis on his desk. He stared at the numbers for a long, silent minute before looking up at her and asking, "How long have you been doing deep dive work like this on your own time?" "Since I started here," she answered smoothly, looking him dead in the eye. "Nobody gives me anything interesting to work on, so I find it myself." That single trade became the firm's most profitable deal of the year. It also became the moment people stopped asking where she went to college and started asking what she was working on next. She leveraged that success into a harder job at a second firm, and then an even bigger role at a third. Every move cost her something: sleep, her 20s, and personal relationships she had to leave behind because she always chose a closing deadline over a weekend out. She didn't regret the trades. She understood that the naive version of herself died in that hospital room, replaced by a woman who had decided exactly what she was willing to sacrifice to never feel powerless again. By the time Apex Capital recruited her to run their distressed corporate debt division, she had built a reputation for finding the hidden rot that arrogant men buried in their books. When the board named her CEO 2 years ago, she didn't take the seat to punish anyone. She took it because she had earned it. But when Julian Mercer's collapsing financial files landed on her desk 18 months later, she recognized it instantly as a door she was never going to walk past. Julian's collapse didn't happen overnight. He had inherited Mercer Industries at 28 from a father who spent 3 decades building it slowly, brick by careful brick. But Julian had never had to build anything, which meant he never worried about losing it. Whenever he made a mistake growing up, his father's money arrived to clean it up before Julian even had time to feel consequence. Over time, that taught him the most dangerous lesson an ambitious man can learn: that risk was just something that happened to other people. He remembered a conversation with his father 11 years ago, right before the old man's health started to fail. His father had sat him down in his private study, looked at him with a tired, heavy expression, and said, "You have never once had to sit with a loss, Julian. Every time you broke something, I bought you a new one before you finished feeling bad about it. I don't know what that has made you, but I know you aren't ready to hold this family's future." Julian had laughed it off that night, driving home thinking his father was just an old man who didn't understand modern business. He carried that arrogant confidence into every reckless real estate deal over the next decade. When the market turned, he was leveraged so deeply in secret bank debt that his entire empire started to crumble. Now, Julian sat in his lawyer's office, sweating through his expensive collar as a stack of financial notices was read aloud to him. For the first time in his life, he felt real, cold fear. He leaned across the desk and asked, "How much cash do we have left in the emergency operational accounts?" His lawyer didn't even look up from the papers as he replied, "Nothing, Julian. The banks are filing to seize your downtown properties by the end of the month. You have exactly one asset left that is large enough to cover the immediate debt, and you already know what it is." "Leo's trust fund," Julian said, his voice dropping. He remembered his father's warning, "I don't trust you not to gamble away his future," and a wave of nausea hit him. His father had known, a full decade in advance, that Julian would eventually drive the company into a ditch. To stop him from looting his own son's inheritance, the old man had engineered a strict legal lock from beyond the grave. The lawyer nodded slowly and told him, "To withdraw any capital from the boy's trust for commercial use, the paperwork requires the physical signature and legal approval of Leo's biological mother. Your father made certain of it before he passed." Julian sat in silence, feeling the bitter sting of realizing his father had understood him better than he understood himself. But instead of facing his own failures, he pushed the feeling down, treating it like just another business obstacle to crush. He looked at the lawyer, waved his hand dismissively, and commanded, "Find where Elena Carter lives today, print out the release forms, and get $50,000 in cash from the safe. She's a nobody. I'll buy her signature by lunch, the exact same way I bought it the first time." The next morning, Julian dressed in his sharpest suit, ready to intimidate Elena all over again. But when his legal team finished running her background check, his head attorney called him in a complete panic. The lawyer explained that Elena wasn't living in some cheap suburban apartment, and she wasn't working an hourly job. Her corporate address was registered to the top floor of the Apex Tower downtown. Julian drove to the glass skyscraper himself, convinced his team had made a stupid clerical error. Apex Capital was the ruthless corporate firm that had spent the last 6 months quietly buying up all of his unpaid bank loans. They were the exact predators actively trying to force him into bankruptcy. He took the elevator up to the 50th floor, walked past the security desk, and pushed open the heavy glass doors of the main boardroom. A woman was sitting at the far end of the long mahogany table, reviewing a stack of financial charts with complete, unhurried stillness. She wore a sharp charcoal suit, her dark hair pulled back cleanly, looking like someone who had long ago stopped needing to prove her right to be in the room. Julian stopped dead in his tracks. The breath left his lungs as he looked at her and whispered, "Elena?" Elena closed the folder in front of her, looked up without blinking and said, "Hello, Julian. It's been 10 years. Have a seat." Julian tried desperately to recover his pride. He marched up to the table, pulled the trust release paperwork out of his briefcase along with the $50,000 check and slid them across the polished wood, saying, "I see you've done well for yourself, but let's cut to the chase. I need your signature on Leo's trust release today. Sign this and you walk away with 50 grand. We are done in 5 minutes, no questions asked." Elena didn't even look at his check. She pushed it with one finger, watching it slide right off the edge of the table and flutter to the floor. She folded her hands together and replied, "You really haven't changed at all, Julian. You still think a check fixes anything you've broken. You didn't come here to negotiate with a surrogate today. You came here to negotiate with the woman who owns 80% of your company's unpaid debt." The color drained from Julian's face completely. He grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself and stammered, "What did you say?" "Your company hasn't belonged to you for months," she told him in a quiet, level voice that cut like ice. "It belongs to me. I simply hadn't decided yet what I wanted to do with you." Julian stumbled out of Apex Tower that afternoon, completely panicked. Money wasn't going to work anymore. Elena held his entire business in the palm of her hand, and desperate men do ugly things when they are cornered. He convinced himself that what he was about to do wasn't cruelty, it was just aggressive business strategy. At 10 o'clock the next morning, the glass doors of Elena's boardroom opened again. Julian walked in, but this time, he wasn't alone. His hand was resting heavily on the shoulder of a 10-year-old boy, pushing him forward into the room. Elena stopped breathing. She stood up slowly from her desk, her heart pounding against her ribs as she got her first look at her son in 10 years. Leo had her dark hair and her same quiet, observant eyes. But he didn't look like a happy child from a loving home. He wore a stiff, private school uniform. His shoulders were drawn inward, and he looked around the massive room with the practiced nervousness of a kid who had learned to try and take up as little space as possible. Julian pushed the boy forward another step, looked at Elena and said, "You want to play tough corporate games with me, Elena? Go ahead, take my company. But if you don't sign these trust papers right now, you aren't just ending my career, you are destroying your son's future. He will lose his home, his private school, and his inheritance because of your greed." A cold, precise rage moved through Elena's chest. She ignored Julian completely, walked around the heavy desk, and knelt down on the carpet so she was eye level with the boy. Her voice dropped into a gentle warmth she hadn't used in years as she asked, "Hi, Leo. My name is Elena. Are you doing all right?" Leo looked up at his father first, the small, quick glance of a child checking if an answer is safe before giving it, before looking back at her and, "My dad said if you don't sign his papers, we won't have any money left, and he'll have to send me away to a boarding school." Elena felt her chest tighten. She touched his arm softly and asked, "Does your dad spend a lot of time with you at home, Leo?" Leo shook his head slowly and replied, "No. He's mostly at work or at parties. I stay with my nanny, Mrs. Gable, almost every day. He only picked me up from school today because he said he needed me to help him win a meeting." The sheer honesty of the boy's words hit harder than any boardroom insult ever could. Elena closed her eyes for a split second, letting the heartbreak wash over her before her expression hardened into pure steel. She stood up, looked directly into Julian's eyes and said, "You brought your own son here to threaten me with his future, and you didn't even have the decency to lie to him about why." Julian opened his mouth to defend himself, but for the first time in his life, he couldn't find a single word to say. Elena didn't sign the papers that day, but she didn't force his immediate surrender in that boardroom either. She knew a desperate billionaire wouldn't just hand over his child in 60 seconds without a fight. She looked at him coldly and said, "I am never signing your release, Julian. In fact, as the legal co-trustee of Leo's fund, I exercised my authority this morning to freeze that account permanently. You will never touch a single dollar of his grandfather's money to pay off your gambling debts." Julian slammed his hand on the table, his composure shattering completely as he yelled, "You can't do that! I'll take you to court! I'll tie you up in litigation for years!" "With what money?" Elena asked quietly, letting the heavy silence of the room answer for her. Julian grabbed Leo's hand and stormed out of the building, spending the next 3 weeks fighting like a drowning man kicking against the tide. Elena watched his slow unraveling from a careful distance through her legal team, letting the reality of his collapse do the heavy lifting. During the first week, Julian desperately pitched 3 outside investment firms to bail him out. But word of his massive hidden debt had already spread through the financial district, and every single firm rejected him within 48 hours. During the second week, Julian's own defense attorneys sat him down in his study and laid out the brutal truth. They explained that because he had fraudulently hidden his debt across corporate accounts, there was no legal scenario where he kept the company. Worse, if Apex Capital pressed formal charges, he was looking at federal prison time. Julian argued and screamed at his lawyers for over an hour before he finally ran out of breath, collapsing into his chair in total silence. By the third week, Julian tried to visit Leo at school, hoping to use the boy for one last emotional plea. But the school administration stopped him at the gate. Elena's lawyers had already filed an emergency child protection order, citing his manipulation in the boardroom, meaning all contact had to go through supervised legal channels. Julian stood outside the school fence for 11 minutes, staring at the building, before turning around and walking away. He told himself it was strategic restraint, but deep down, he finally recognized the ugly truth. He wasn't fighting for his son. He had never fought for his son in 10 years. He was only fighting to protect his own pride. When Julian finally sat across from Elena's legal team at the end of the month, he was a completely broken man. The terms were simple. He would sign over full, unconditional physical and legal custody of Leo to Elena. In exchange, Apex Capital would absorb his company's debts and quietly bury the corporate fraud, allowing him to walk away without a criminal record. He looked at the custody surrender forms for a long time. There was no argument left in him. He picked up the pen, signed his name at the bottom of the page, set the pen down, and walked out of the office without saying a single word. He didn't ask to say goodbye to Leo, and as the heavy door closed behind him, everyone in the room understood that his silence was the most honest thing he had ever given the boy. The boardroom was quiet after the lawyers cleared out. Elena walked over to the tall glass windows and found Leo standing there, watching his father's black car pull away into the city traffic far below. His shoulders were slumped, lost in the quiet sadness of a boy who realized his father had just traded him away to save himself from prison. Elena knelt down beside him on the carpet and gently took both of his small hands in hers. Her voice was warm and steady as she looked into his eyes and said, "You never have to worry about being sent away again, Leo. Your father is gone, and he is never going to use you as a bargaining chip ever again." Leo looked at her, his bottom lip trembling slightly as he asked, Are you really my mom?" "Yes, sweetie," Elena said, her voice finally breaking as a tear slipped down her cheek after 10 years of holding it back. "I am. And I am so sorry it took me this long to come get you." It wasn't a magical overnight fairy tale. You don't erase 10 years of cold neglect in a single afternoon. There were tough months ahead, quiet nights where Leo would flinch if a door slammed too loud, and painful moments where he asked sharp, heavy questions about why she hadn't come for him sooner. Elena answered every single question honestly, never hiding the truth about the contract or her fear of fighting his father's wealth in court. Slowly, day by day, the walls came down. 3 months later, on a bright Saturday morning, Elena sat on the floor of their new home, helping Leo build a model rocket he had picked out. He laughed at a joke she made, a real, loud, unbothered laugh that filled the entire room. She looked at her son, smiling through a quiet sense of peace, knowing that the empire she bought didn't mean a thing compared to the family they were finally building together.